What if the royal love story everyone memorized wasn't a fairy tale at all, but a carefully managed saga that changes depending on which angle you're watching from? That's the pressure point Tom Bower pushes, and he does it with the certainty of a biographer who thrives on testing glossy myths. His latest round of claims doesn't gently prod the narrative around Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. It drags it under a floodlight and asks whether the couple engineered a brand so tight that the seams are finally visible. He isn't just relaying gossip, he's mapping patterns, carefully timed statements, dramatic pivots, and an insistence on controlling the frame. Whether you see that as smart survival or straight up stagecraft depends on your view, but it's exactly why people keep watching. And what happens next, Bower suggests, could determine whether this story matures or simply spins. Bower's core sketch is blunt: Meghan as strategist, Harry as believer. In his telling, the partnership moved quickly from romance to messaging, where press cycles, positioning, and curated appearances mattered as much as protocol. Admirers call that media literacy in a ruthless ecosystem. Critics call it choreography. Bower doesn't deliver a courtroom verdict. He invites the audience to track the repetitions. When the storyline turns, he says, the roles turn with it. A sympathetic interview becomes a rallying cry. A setback becomes proof of a bigger battle. It's a rhythm built for modern attention spans. But that wasn't the whole story. The comparisons to Princess Diana were inevitable and immediate. Some echoes felt sincere, others looked like reenactments. Bower's interpretation, his interpretation, is that Meghan studied Diana's public aura with deliberate care, trying to borrow warmth without the decades of lived history that made it real. That's an allegation, not settled fact, and it should be treated as such. Still, the idea stuck because the visuals were familiar. The tilted head, the gentle hands, the open expression built for empathy. When done once, it's homage. When repeated, critics say it can feel like performance. Fans answer that every public figure learns visual language, and Diana's vocabulary is the one the world already speaks. And what happened next would shock everyone who assumed the conversation was over. Bower points to inconsistencies that piled up over time. Did Meghan go in knowing almost nothing about royal realities, or did she follow the institution closely? Was she an outsider overwhelmed by antique traditions? Or a seasoned professional who understood exactly how headlines are made and unmade? In one telling, she's unprepared. In another, she's the only one prepared. On their own, those pivots could be harmless. Stack them across interviews and projects, Bower argues, and they dull credibility. Supporters counter that people contain multitudes and that context shifts answers. Both can be true, yet repetition is ruthless. The more the version changes, the more viewers default to doubt. But that wasn't the whole story. Then come the rumors, the kind that swirl for years. Bower references online chatter about elite circles, curated access, and assertive networking long before royal life. Crucially, he presents these as claims and speculation, not proof. That line matters. Rumors suggest Meghan moved quickly in glamorous spaces, using proximity and polish to accelerate progress faster than auditions alone usually allow. Supporters say networking is the rule, not the exception, and that many of these stories are recycled hearsay. The responsible framing is simple. These are allegations, not confirmed facts. Still, rumors fuel interest because they hint at motivation, and motivation drives clicks. And what followed next widened the debate instead of closing it. Outside the palace, Hollywood became both stage and stress test. Deals were huge, expectations bigger, and scrutiny relentless. Some projects delivered heartfelt moments. Others stalled under the weight of their own drum rolls. Bower's critique is that brand outpaced substance, that headlines promised more than the finished work delivered. Admirers counter that the bar was set to impossible, that bias colored every review, and that new creative identities take time. The truth likely sits between. What's undeniable is how fast attention can turn to fatigue when the sizzle arrives before the steak. But that wasn't the whole story. The Oprah sit-down supercharged everything. For supporters, it was catharsis and clarity, a necessary unburdening that turned private pain into public context. For skeptics, it felt like a courtroom without cross-examination, heavy on sweeping revelations and light on receipts. Bower's take is blunt. He believes the broadcast locked in a habit of headline-sized claims with hazy edges. That's his view, not gospel. Yet it mirrors the modern media loop. One soundbite multiplies into a week of interpretations, and nuance gets replaced by debate. The aftershocks were predictable: official statements, fact checks, and months of polarized commentary. And what happened next didn't lower the temperature, it raised it. Bauer's portrayal of Harry is another live wire. He sketches a sincere man who believes in purpose, but may be easier to steer than he realizes, shifting from service and duty to advocacy and critique without always bridging the tone gap. That is interpretation, not diagnosis. Still, even friendly commentators notice the transformation. The grandson who distrusted cameras now depends on them. The veteran who kept his circle small now speaks to global platforms. If Meghan is the strategist in Bauer's telling, Harry becomes the amplifier, the voice that turns a personal chapter into a global headline. But that wasn't the whole story. Family and privacy sit at the heart of this saga. Bauer argues that certain personal moments looked timed for maximum public effect. Those are allegations and must be handled carefully, especially where children are concerned. In the social media age, the line between sharing and staging blurs for nearly everyone in public life. The ethical questions are wider than one household. When is posting a milestone healthy transparency? And when does it slide into strategy? Different viewers will draw that line differently. What's constant is that the higher the stakes, the more authenticity matters, and the more audiences scrutinize the motive behind every reveal. And what follows next determines whether people lean in or look away. Reputation is currency, and currency fluctuates. Some partners stayed loyal, others stepped back. Bauer reads those shifts as a quiet referendum on reliability and audience appetite. Fans reply that every public figure faces cooling periods, and that the couple is policed with unusual intensity. Either way, momentum returns the old-fashioned way, by shipping work that changes the subject. That's the paradox at the center of modern branding. The more you talk about reclaiming the story, the more you remind everyone of the controversy you want to surpass. The only durable answer is output that stands on its own, and when that lands, the noise fades. There's also a context problem that rarely fits in a headline. Meghan entered an institution that magnifies every difference and politicizes every gesture. Conversations about identity, class, celebrity, and monarchy collided at once, and each camp projected its priorities onto her face. Some of what she faced was plainly unfair. Some defenses were reflexive. Sorting through that mess is hard for anyone, let alone two people trying to build a new public life with global names attached. None of that absolves inconsistency, and none of it erases bias. It simply explains why the conversation refuses to sit still. But that wasn't the whole story. If there's a practical lesson, it's consistency. Narratives don't need perfection. They need to feel honest across time. When every appearance promises a revelation, the word loses power. When every project arrives with drum rolls, the audience stops clapping. When every disagreement is framed as a crusade, fatigue sets in. Bauer's harshest thesis is that credibility, once dented, is the hardest thing to repair. The antidote isn't a bigger claim, it's quieter proof. Deliver on a mission, let the work speak, and let the audience discover it before you announce it. That is the only way to reset a room that has grown skeptical. So, did Bauer expose something that left Meghan stunned, or did he sharpen what observers already suspected? Perhaps both. He reignited debate and forced a second look at patterns, the echo of Diana, the shifting frames, the gap between promise and product. He also reminded everyone how modern fame really works. You can't retreat from the spotlight and still bank its benefits for long. The audience notices, partners notice, eventually the market notices, and when that happens, the margin for error shrinks. That pressure is brutal, but it's also clarifying. In the end, the story loops back to perception versus reality. Meghan and Harry set out to define themselves on their terms, and sometimes they have. They also learned that once a narrative becomes a business, every chapter gets audited by millions of eyes. Bauer stepped in to audit the stack. He will be right in places and wrong in others, but the effect is plain. The gloss has been stress tested, the room is quieter, and the next move must carry more weight than the last headline. If they want a second act that lasts, it won't be built on slogans, it will be built on work. That might be the real exposure here. Not a single decisive document, not one final gotcha, but a recognizable pattern. A brand can be magnetic and still feel overproduced. A mission can be meaningful and still sound rehearsed. Bauer's work functions like harsh lighting. It exaggerates some angles and corrects others, but it also forces a clearer look. Once you've seen the stage marks, It's hard to unsee them. Maybe that's why this saga still pulls us in. It isn't just about a couple and a crown, it's about how power, PR, and attention collide, and what survives when the script is stripped back. For Meghan and Harry, the path forward isn't mysterious, but it is demanding. Choose projects that don't need declarations to matter. Speak precisely when stakes are high and let silence do the rest. Build trust by stacking small, verifiable wins that don't require a chorus to be noticed. People forgive missteps when progress is visible. Audiences are generous when promises are kept. Even critics soften when results outperform predictions. That's not a fairy tale. That's mechanics. And that's the irony at the center of Bauer's storm. The more his claims echo, the more they invite a cleaner answer than any interview can provide. If the next chapter focuses less on framing and more on measurable good, the questions that drive today's headlines start to fade on their own. If not, the cycle continues. Big promises, bigger reactions, and shrinking patience. Whether you see Bauer as fearless or opportunistic, he has highlighted a vulnerability that only results conceal. In a world that runs on attention, clarity is currency, and that is the one resource no brand can counterfeit for long.